Okay, so today we're going to be talking about swords and black blades and Zoro and Mihawk and Ryuma and everything that has to do with claw. Swords.
All right. Welcome one, welcome all. Today's video we're going to be talking about swords and swordsmen and Zoro and Ryuma and Mihawk and everything in between. So, let's get right into it. The latest chapter, chapter 937, Kikimaro no Hagi Bridge, has dropped a little bit of tidbits of information regarding Black Blades and regarding Ryuma's backstory, a little bit of his history. And so he states in one of the panels that Shusui became a Black Blade, meaning that there was some sort of transformation of a normal blade, just a Meito grade blade, and becoming a Yokodo, which means Black Blade. And so there's a couple of different speculations on how armament Haki affects the blade itself and how blades become black blades, but there's a lot of different things and different ways that you could take it. So I'm going to start off with black blade transformation. And so one of the main thoughts that I thought of when I first heard it was just probably over a span of time, by using armament Haki during fights, the armament Haki would then become permanently infused with whatever blade of whatever person was using. And the more I started thinking about it, the more I was kind of playing scenarios in my head. I thought back to the Luffy versus Katakuri fight, and we get that flashback of Rayleigh, and Rayleigh tells Luffy that his Haki would bloom in serious fights or in very difficult fights or life-threatening fights. So I was thinking about it, and I was like, if Haki is permanently infused into a weapon, whether it be like a sword, a katana, a bisento, like a mace, any of that, right? Would that be the same concept of Haki blooming, but to a different degree of, like, let's say the observation Haki that Katakuri had, that Luffy was trying to get, the future sight. So let's take this in for example. If Zoro is fighting King towards the end of the Wano Country arc, could his Haki, his armament Haki, bloom to a point to where then it becomes infused with the blade? So if you think about it, right, and when your Haki blooms in a certain situation, so Katakuri's armament Haki was super hardened, his power mochi, his block mochi, right? And Luffy's armament, by fighting Katakuri in that state with his state of Haki, probably bloomed his armament Haki as well. Maybe not to the degree of his observation Haki, because the fight was primarily more based on observation Haki and future sight. But if a swordsman, right, or a weapon user has a high caliber of armament Haki and he fought someone on an even higher tier than that, wouldn't it be possible for his Haki to bloom in the sense that the Haki then infuses itself with the sword? So this idea takes the time limit, right, of Haki infused into a blade and shortens it drastically. So let's just say Zoro has about 4 more fights left in the series, like big fights, right? 4 more fights until Shiryu, and Shiryu will be his last fight. Let's just say he has 5 more fights, right? And all 4 of those fights are a better armament user, a better armament user, a better armament user, and the best armament user, right? By him fighting those high-tier armament users, he could potentially infuse his blade with Haki and have either the Wado Ichimonji, or my idea is that he gets his own sword, gives back Shusui during the Wano Kuni arc, gets his own sword, and then turns both of them into black blades, and then ends up getting the Shodai Katetsu by the end of the series. So that's one possibility of black blade transformation. And then the other one that I was thinking about, because it could be a time thing, like a lot of people say, where it's like linear, to where it's like, if my elbow to my fingertip is the height, or the base to the height of fighting in one piece, right? And let's say you have a swordsman who goes from here, and then this is the black blade. This could take, like, let's say 5 years. This could take like 10 years. This could take a whole entire lifetime, right? And so you could have a swordsman who isn't necessarily the greatest or the strongest or anywhere near the top tier, And he could be fighting with armament Haki inside of his, we'll just call it katana for now. He could be fighting with an armament-infused katana, but have it never turn into a black blade, right? Because there could be an external case or an external force that allows katanas to be transformed, or weapons transformed, into black blades. So the way that I was thinking about this is, it would make sense if Shanks doesn't have a black blade, because he doesn't always fight, right? And he'll probably never have a black blade in his life. And so Shanks's griffin, right, is just a normal, I don't think it's a graded sword, but it's just a normal sword, right? But let's say that the extension of the Haki within the katana itself, right, also requires a very strong willpower, right? So Zoro's goal is to become the world's greatest swordsman, right? That was probably Mihawk's goal as well before he achieved it. And so if you have this willpower, right, there could be an instance where, let's say, Ryuma had Conquerors, right? And he had this really strong willpower. He had the Conquerors Haki. And that Conqueror's Haki is also a bypass for having a black blade. So if Conqueror's has an effect on actually creating black blades from normal blades, it would make pretty decent sense for Zoro to have, well, one, he'd have to have Conquerors first, but since he does have the dream of becoming the world's greatest swordsman, I think there is an emphasis that at one point in the series he will have Conquerors if he doesn't have it already. But if Conquerors does play a role into creating black blades, it would probably be best for Zoro to show it within the Wano arc, because if there is this escalated time period of you need to fight, let's say, X amount of battles with X amount of hours of Haki into the blade, with X amount of hours of meditating with your blade, whatever it is, right? If Conquerors is that bypass, and Zoro does have Conquerors showing it within Wano, if he does, right, could potentially get his own black blade before the end of the series without having to see Zoro 80 years down, or what is he now, 21? Let's say 50 years down the line when he's 71, with finally acquiring black blades, and we don't get to see it. So this could be a cool way for Oda to show us that you could create your own black blades if you have these special circumstances filled out from like A to C, right? And then continuing on from the becoming black blades themselves, or the fighting to get into a black blade, or the transformation of black blades, I want to talk about the O-Saijo Wazamono graded blades, because Yoru and the Shodai Katetsu are the only known O-Saijo Wazamono graded blades, the 12 graded supreme grade swords. And I think there is going to be probably about 6 of them referenced within the Wano arc. I think this is the best time for Oda to drop information about the rest, if not all, if not the rest of the O-Saijo Wazamono blades. And because people saw that Yoru, Mihawk's blade, was a black blade, a Yokoto, they just assumed that all O-Saijo Wazamono blades were going to be black blades, and I don't think that's the case. So in the case of Shusui being a black blade, Shusui's actual ranking is just an O Wazamono, but it's still a black blade. So I think at any point in time, with the right circumstances, any blade could become a black blade. But I also think that you don't necessarily need a black blade to have it become an O-Saijo Wazamono graded blade. So for instance, if Shanks's griffin is actually an O-Saijo Wazamono, it would explain why his isn't actually covered in armament permanently. And then it would also explain how you could have these 12 greatest swords with not every single one of them being black blades, because Gyukimaru stated that Ryuma himself and Shusui were national treasures, and Shusui became a black blade around the time of Ryuma, or whenever Ryuma had it, right? So there could be another instance where, let's say, another far-off country in the One Piece world had a famed weapons guy or swordsman, right? And he went through his whole entire life as the greatest swordsman of his country, not of the world, but of his country, right? And he never knew anything about Haki. He's still an excellent swordsman, but he wouldn't have the chance to imbue his blade or weapon with Haki. And on top of that, if the country itself, after the death of that said swordsman or weaponsman, took whatever weapon he had, like a katana, a sword, like a mace, a bludgeon, anything of the sort, right? If he's like a giant, if he's a giant, if he's a giant, and he had a warhammer, right? And the dude died, and then he never knew about Haki. And then let's say Elbaf has this giant warhammer, but it's one of the O-Saijo Wazamono graded weapons, right? I don't think let's just say hypothetically, right? And they took it, and he never knew about Haki, and nobody's used it since. It's still an O-Saijo Wazamono graded blade, but there's been no Haki imbued into it, so it's not necessarily a black blade, even though it's a warhammer. I'm just going to call it a blade. So I think that's another case, is that not necessarily all O-Saijo Wazamono blades have to be black blades. I think maybe Yoru and 3 others, maybe a third of all the 12, so 4 in total, are going to be black blades, and the rest are just going to be like really important, prominent weapons. And so going on from that, I think the last thing I really want to talk about is the actual title of World's Greatest Swordsman itself, Mihawk's title right now, and Zoro's future title. And if stated, Ryuma was... however long ago Ryuma was around, right? And he fought off countries, the world government, enemies, natural threats, like big-ass monsters, sea kings, all that kind of stuff, right? And then he became a famed swordsman around that time when he was defending all of Wano country, what it seems to be like himself from what Gukimaro states. And then after his death, or very shortly before his death, was giving the title of Sword God, right? That could be the implication of him actually being the world's greatest swordsman. And so the thing that I like to think about the most, the thing that I like to think about the most is how Mihawk got his title and who he got his title from. And a lot of people will say that he got his title from Shanks, but if Shanks was on the Roger Pirates and became a Yonko after Roger's death and has a huge connection with the world government, being that with a connection with the Gorosei, he can just walk in there, right? I don't think that all 3 of these things within the time frame he could also be the world's greatest swordsman. He's too lackadaisical for it, and he's not really the one to go out looking for a fight. But if the fight was brought to him and there was something treading on either like the past of the world or treading on his crew, he would fight, yeah, but he's not actively seeking out other people to duel. And I think this is what differentiates Mihawk from Shanks, within people speculating Shanks being the previous world's greatest swordsman and Mihawk taking the title from him, even though they were buddy-buddy. I think there's a more likely plausibility that one of Ryuma's descendants or somebody close to the Wano Kuni island, right, was a swordsman, the world's greatest swordsman, before Mihawk took the title. And I think Mihawk didn't take it out of malice. I think he's like Zoro. He probably looked up to somebody, and that somebody seems to be a swordsman from the Wano Kuni area. And I would much more likely see a tie for Mihawk back to Wano Kuni for the world's greatest swordsman title, of him defeating I would like to see one of Ryuma's descendants, right? But it doesn't have to be Ryuma's descendant directly. It could just be a descendant of the Wano country who's held that title. Let's say Wano's held that title, world's greatest swordsman, for like the past 600 years, right? And then Mihawk is the first outsider to get that title and now possesses it. I think that'd be a lot cooler than saying, oh yeah, Shanks was the world's greatest swordsman on top of being a Yonko, on top of being in Roger's crew, on top of being buddies with the Gorosei, on top of being the one gatekeeper for the One Piece, like all this kind of stuff, right? I think it would bring a lot more to the story while still keeping Shanks's repetition intact, right? For Mihawk to defeat somebody who is a descendant of Ryuma or a descendant of Wano Kuni. And then that goes into say when Zoro's going to get the title. And I want to make a whole nother video about my Shiryu versus Zoro speculation of the fight and when it's going to happen, because I don't think there's a point to having Zoro train underneath Mihawk for 2 years to come back and then take the title from him. I think there's a lot better ways of going around it and actually having Zoro defeat somebody who defeated Mihawk for a Avenge the Fallen. I can't wait for the new Avengers movie, but a Avengers the Fallen type thing, and I like that. Personally, I think that resonates a lot more with people than Zoro defeating his master, because then it continues the cycle. So if Mihawk didn't defeat his master for the world's greatest swordsman title, Zoro shouldn't either. And we don't know how Mihawk got the title yet, but it would seem a little redundant if Mihawk's master, the guy who trained Mihawk, gave the title to Mihawk when Mihawk finally became stronger than him, and then Zoro does the exact same thing. I don't think we need mirroring like that in the One Piece story. And let's see if I got anything else. No, I think that's it. Ryuma, Sword God, probably the world's first greatest swordsman. Black blades, how they're transformed. Conquerors Haki, armament Haki, time, fights, battles, meditation, anything else that I could think of. I probably covered it. Sword grades. Not all O-Saijo Wazamono are going to be Yokotus, which means black blades. Not all black blades have to be the greatest swords ever, because Shusui is a O-Wazamono, not an O-Saijo Wazamono. So, yeah, I think that's it. Thank you guys for your time. Really appreciate it. I know this is kind of all over the place. I've had a weird day. My video isn't going to be the sickest one, but
I did put a lot of time and effort into this, and I'd really appreciate it if you commented and subscribed. If you liked anything, want to comment on anything, and just subscribe anyways. So
I'm going to do a Haki video right after this. I'm going to fix my shit. Thank you guys. I'll see you soon.